Why don't we just do like a test question? What'd you have for breakfast?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good choice.
Yeah. Nothing.
Do you have any lunch?
No.
Okay.
I'm usually one meal a day.
Yeah. When do you plan on eating?
It's usually somewhere between 5 and 7 p.m. typically.
So we are here with Dr. Ken Berry, the author of Lies My Doctor Told Me. And that's a pretty compelling title.
It was meant to be.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us the impetus for writing that?
So my entire medical career, starting in medical school, I kept hearing these things that were taught to me as medical truth, medical fact, that would stick out to me as not making common sense. And sometimes in medical practice, things that make common sense are absolutely wrong. And so, but I was so busy as a medical student and as a resident training, I didn't have time to actually go do the research on these things. So I kind of just filed them away for further thought in the future. And that's kind of where the book started. Even as a medical student, things I'd be told that just didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, really? Is that true? I can't believe that's true, but I didn't have time. And so then I started to practice, and then I really didn't have time. And after a few years in practice, I kind of got everything where I wanted it, and I was able to start doing some research on these things that I'd learned years ago as fact. And then the more I started looking at other things that I'd been taught as fact, turns out they're probably not true either. And so the reason I chose the word lies instead of myths is that, if your hairdresser tells you, oh, you should eat more whole grains because they're good for you, she doesn't really have any fiduciary responsibility to you. She just needs to fix your hair, right? But if your doctor, who's taken an oath and who's a licensed professional, it's his job to know what's best for the care and feeding of human beings. If he tells you something that's not factual and that's actually harmful, then that's worse than just a myth. Or it's worse than just a mistake. It's his job to know, and if he chooses not to know, because that's what doctors do. We're busy. Yeah, you're busy, but are you really going to tell some person whose life depends on what you say just something, the first thing that comes to mind, or what you saw on the news last night, or what you read in a magazine, or what you were taught 20 years ago and you haven't given it any thought? That's not really your job as a doctor or a healthcare professional, as a provider. Your job is to know that what you're saying is the most factually based. It also makes common sense, and it's also backed up by the research. And so that's what I try to do with lies is look at the research, but then also consider the common sense of the situation, put those two together, and see what I came up with.
Okay. And so it really does sound like the average doctor is, at the very least, just kind of behind the curve when it comes to the newest research. What would you say the percentage of doctors having actually read recent medical papers or actively reading medical papers, per week or on a per month or per day basis?
You mean read the entire study or just read the abstract and the conclusion?
I'd say the whole study.
The whole study? We were just actually talking about this last night. If I was able to give 1,000 doctors a truth serum injection, so they had to tell the truth, and I said, how many studies have you read the complete study from front to back, and looked up one or two of the citations, the most important citations, and not just read the abstract, which is a summary, and read the conclusion of the abstract, which is a summary of the summary? I think the percentage would probably be less than 5%, less than probably 0.5%. I'd say 5 doctors out of 1,000 over the last 12 months have actually read a complete study and looked up a couple of the citations. And then if you want to talk about how many doctors out of that 1,000 actually looked at the supplementary stuff, looked at the actual crunched numbers from the study, that would be 0 out of 1,000, maybe 1 out of 1,000 if we're lucky.
Okay. One more question on that thought. What was there some piece of information that was kind of the what do you call it, the needle that broke the camel's back? You found this one thing out and you said, okay, now I have to write this book.
Well, there's multiple ones, but probably the main one is, as I moved from the standard American diet to then a paleo diet, then a low carb, high fat diet, then a carnivore, or then the ketogenic way of eating, more and more I started to look into total cholesterol and LDL, that we were all taught that without a doubt was the most important risk factor for heart attack and stroke that people could have if you had high total cholesterol and high LDL. That was the ultimate risk factor, and so you had to take a pill for that. And so the more I looked into the research, the less I found that compelled me to believe that any longer. And the more I looked, the more other risk factors looked like they were obviously much more important than LDL and total cholesterol. And so I really started to research that. And when I found out that basically Big Pharma was making billions of dollars a year off of pills that millions of people were taking every day, that probably wasn't decreasing their risk of heart attack and stroke in any meaningful way. That was probably the straw that got the camel in trouble. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I got to talk about this out loud.
Great. There was this one quote from your book I wanted to see if I could get a comment on. So you said, if you feel like I'm tiptoeing around just telling you that taking a statin is stupid and it is not protecting you from a heart attack and may actually be hurting you in other ways, you would be correct.
Yeah. And then so when I wrote the book, I was trying to be a little more subtle in my advice about whether or not you should take a statin in order to lower your risk of a heart attack and stroke. But I'm much less subtle now, because as I continue to come to conferences like Low Carb Houston and KetoCon and Keto Fest and hear the leading minds in the field really tear apart the hypothesis that saturated fat will increase your risk of heart attack and stroke, and that having a high total cholesterol and a high LDL increase your risk of heart attack and stroke, it just becomes silly. After you've really dove deep into this topic, there's no research that supports that at all. And obviously the common sense of what humans ancestrally ate doesn't jive with that at all. And so over the last few months, I've become increasingly less subtle about my recommendation for statin drugs and who should take them and who should not.
So you were talking about how what led you to writing the book was the transition from the standard American diet, and you went into paleo to low carb, high fat, and then ketogenic. Is there any recent developments?
Yeah, actually there is. And so I really feel like that ancestral paleo is this, if you did a Venn diagram, right? And then within that is the ketogenic way of eating. And then I think for at least some people, a smaller, even more appropriate diet is the carnivore diet, which is basically eating fatty animal products, fatty meats. And so I'd seen a couple of guys doing this, and they'd had great success with muscle tone, with health. Their markers of inflammation got better. Chronic complications like psoriasis, heartburn, etc., kept getting better and better. And I kept hearing this, and I thought, I like to research, I like to experiment. I'm going to try carnivore for a month and just see what happens. And that was about 7 months ago. And after the month was completed, I'd lost 7 more pounds. Heartburn, which had plagued me my entire adult life, it got about 80% better with keto. Didn't really get better with paleo. Got about 80% better with keto. And I've been hardcore carnivore, I'd say 98% carnivore for the last 7 months. I have 0 heartburn. Wow. And for me, that's a little bit of heaven. And if anybody's ever suffered from heartburn, it's not fun. It's not, like, oh, it's heartburn. No, it really hurts. And it's really, it impaired my ability to speak. I'd have to swallow. I'd have to clear my throat. And it literally impaired my ability to communicate with patients. And then I was trying to do some YouTube videos as well. And I could see myself having the kind of the GERD swallow, trying to get everything where it needed to be so I could say the next sentence. And after I've been carnivore, I don't have that anymore at all. It's completely gone.
Wow, that's really interesting. Do you have any, maybe ideas on what the mechanism might be?
I think based on my ancestral heritage, my DNA, I have a very large percentage of Neanderthal DNA. I have a lot of Nordic, Scandinavian, Scotch-Irish, basically the northern latitudes. And so you can imagine, if you think just common sense about this, what did they eat 8, 9, 10, 11 months out of the year, right? It's cold there. There's no fruits and berries and guavas and mangoes and oranges. There's none of that, right? And so for the vast majority of their entire life, they ate fatty meat. And then if they could find some veg, or if they couldn't find any meat, they might eat some veg. And once a year, they might have a few berries or some little fruit or something. But for the majority of their entire life, the majority of their entire year, they ate fatty meat. That's what they lived on. And I think that, over the last 50 years, we've been told to eat the standard American diet. That's not enough time for our DNA to catch up and to actually cope with that. But I think my ancestors lived at northern climates for at least 100,000 years, and that's enough time, that's enough generations for things to start to matter what you eat. And I think that's why I was being inflamed by at least some, if not all, of the vegetables. And when I removed that final carbohydrate source from my diet, I feel great. My body fat percentage hasn't been this good since I was in my 20s, and I'll be 50 next month.
Wow.
So you might not have known that, but yeah, I'm about to be a grown man next month, or in December. And so my muscle percentage, I seldom work out. But it's like I just naturally put back on the muscle that a human would have if you fed that human the right diet. So it's kind of it's very interesting. And so I've extended my 1 month carnivore experiment, and now I'm in my 8th month because I feel great, and I've yet to have a bad side effect. All my inflammatory markers are perfect. All of my lab markers that I care about are perfect. My total cholesterol and LDL are both sky high, but I don't care about that because I don't believe they're risk factors for heart attack and stroke.
Wow, wow, and it's funny that you say that because when I first met you at the conference, I said, well, you look a lot more muscular than you do in your YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And I was saying, oh, maybe it's the camera, but maybe it's the
maybe it's
diet.
carnivore. Yeah.
Interesting. And so it kind of sounds like the point is the carnivore diet may work for you depending on your genes or your ancestry. Did you take a 23andMe test?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how. And my wife and I both did, and so she has a lot more equatorial DNA. She's Spanish. She's Tiano. She has a lot of equatorial heritage, and therefore she tried carnivore and she didn't really enjoy it. But she eats a fatty, meat heavy ketogenic diet, right? And so she has some vegetables, and they do fine for her. She looks great. She's lost weight. She feels great. Her inflammatory markers are all normal. And so probably for her DNA, it's appropriate to have a little bit more veg than it is for me.
Okay. Interesting. And one last question on that line. So is there any other markers that might indicate like, okay, you have a more carnivore tuned genes? Would maybe one of the ApoEs? Would that?
Yeah, I would look at your 23andMe or some DNA concern that would look deep into your DNA. I would look at all the inflammatory markers. I would look definitely at your insulin and glucose metabolism markers. Some of the markers on your lipid panel I would look at, like your triglycerides and your HDL. Both of mine are splendid on carnivore. And then you could also look even deeper, and I'm sure there are tests we haven't even discovered yet that would look even deeper. But I think at this point in our medical knowledge, every marker that matters, carnivore makes my markers better. And I don't know if that applies to every human, but I think it applies to a certain percentage.
Wow. Okay. So I guess a final point to end on would be something like maybe if you're interested in it, and you don't have any other reservations toward, or let's just say if you're interested in it, why not just try it for a month? And if you really want to confirm beforehand, you could take a look at your ancestry.
And I think it's a valid argument to say, a lot of people say, oh, keto that's bad for you. Keto is comprised entirely of whole, real foods. So you're basically saying that real food is bad for me? Real food that humans have been eating for 200,000 years are now bad for me. That's what you're saying if you say that. And then the same goes for carnivore, which I consider to be a subset of the ketogenic way. So eating real meat, whole meat that humans have been eating for at least 200,000 years as Homo sapien sapien, that's now bad for me somehow? Even though my DNA is completely used to that and has been eating that our entire existence on this planet, now it's bad for me. You see, that just doesn't make any sense when you look at it that way. And so, but people talk about carnivore and keto like they're a fad diet or like they're some new thing or it's some kind of untested thing. Human beings have been eating keto and carnivore for 200,000 years. They actually are the appropriate human diet. The diet we've been eating for the last 60 years is actually the fad.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's kind of, you hear a lot of people say, oh, there's no evidence behind the carnivore diet. It's like, well, don't we have, a couple 100,000 years of evidence that it was working?
Exactly, yeah. Every couple for the last 200,000 years eating keto and carnivore has successfully reproduced. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here, nor would you. If there was one failed reproduction because keto or carnivore was bad for us, you wouldn't be here, nor would I. But we are here. And so it must be a pretty darn good diet if it's kept us reproducing and not being extinct for at least 200,000 years. Some would say longer.
Yeah, that's another great point. At the very least, we can say meat surely doesn't cause erectile dysfunction.
Surely does not. I totally agree.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Dr. Berry.
My pleasure.
Is there somewhere where I can direct people to reach your content?
Yeah, so if you just search for Dr. Ken Berry or Ken Berry MD, you can find me on YouTube, Facebook. That's where I do the majority of my work. I'm also on Twitter, and I do a lot more on Instagram now that I finally figured it out, what the hell Instagram actually is. But you can find me if you search those.
Okay, thanks so much.
Oh man, it's my pleasure.